The lecture hall falls silent as I walk to the podium. 30 faculty members sit in uncomfortable chairs, their faces showing shock and confusion. Madison Clarke, sitting in the third row, drops her coffee cup. It crashes to the floor, brown liquid spreading across the marble. "Good morning, everyone," I say, my Chinese accent still clear after all these years. "I am Dr. Lian Chen, your new Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities." President Williams stands beside me, beaming with pride. Dr. Chen comes to us with exceptional credentials. Harvard PhD, Oxford Fellowship, and author of 15 published books on English literature. I watch Madison's face turn white. She looks exactly like she did 20 years ago when she led the entire seminar class in laughter at my pronunciation. The same woman who called me Broken Lian in front of everyone. The irony tastes sweeter than I ever imagined. They mocked my English. Now I control the English department. Every tenure decision, every hiring choice, every career path in this room runs through me. Madison stares at me with growing horror. She remembers. Good. Because I have never forgotten a single moment of the humiliation she put me through. 20 years ago, I stepped off the plane at Denver International Airport with nothing but a suitcase and a full scholarship to study English literature. My English was broken, my accent thick, but my dreams were bigger than my fears. I had grown up in a small village outside Shanghai. My parents worked 16-hour days in a factory to save money for my education. They sacrificed everything so I could come to America and study the language I loved. "You will master English better than the Americans," my mother told me the night before I left. "You will make us proud." But walking across campus for the first time, I felt small and lost. Students spoke so fast I could barely understand them. Their casual confidence made me feel like an outsider looking through glass. My first class was Introduction to American Literature. I sat in the back row, hoping to blend in. The professor, Dr. Anderson, seemed kind enough. But when he asked us to introduce ourselves and share our favorite book, my heart started racing. "I am Lian Chen," I said when my turn came. "My favorite book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen." Except I pronounced it Pride and Prejudice. The class erupted in giggles. Madison Clarke sat 3 seats away from me, blonde and beautiful and everything I was not. She turned to her friend and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Did she just say prejudice? How did she even get into this program? More laughter rippled through the room. My cheeks burned with shame, but I kept my eyes on my notebook and said nothing. Dr. Anderson cleared his throat. "Let's continue with our discussion of American literary themes." But Madison wasn't done. 20 minutes later, when I raised my hand to answer a question about symbolism in The Great Gatsby, she interrupted me. "Professor, I can't understand what she's saying. Can someone translate?" The entire class laughed again. Dr. Anderson looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He just moved on to another student, leaving me sitting there with my hand still raised and my answer stuck in my throat. After class, Madison walked past my desk with her group of friends. "Maybe she should take ESL classes before trying literature," she said loud enough for me to hear. "Poor thing doesn't even know how to pronounce basic words." They called me Broken Lian from that day forward. 3 weeks into the semester, I thought things might be getting better. A girl named Sarah from my dorm invited me to what she called a study group at Madison's sorority house. "We're all working on the Hemingway essay," Sarah explained. Madison said it would be fun to practice reading our drafts out loud. I was so grateful to be included that I didn't question why they wanted me to read first. I stood in front of 12 students in Madison's fancy living room and began reading my essay about symbolism in The Old Man and the Sea. What I didn't know was that Madison was recording everything on her phone. Every mispronounced word, every grammatical mistake, every moment where my accent made the words sound different than they expected. By the next morning, The video was everywhere. Students mimicked my accent in the hallways. Someone had even auto-tuned my voice and made it into a ringtone. "Oh my God, it's broken, Lian," I heard someone shout as I walked across the quad. I ran to my dorm room and cried for 3 hours. Then I called my parents, but I couldn't tell them what was happening. How could I explain that the dream they had sacrificed everything for was turning into a nightmare? I started eating lunch alone in my dorm room. The dining hall felt like walking into enemy territory, where every conversation stopped when I approached and every laugh felt like it was directed at me. The library became my sanctuary. I hid in the back corner of the 4th floor, surrounded by dusty books that couldn't judge my accent or make fun of my pronunciation. I wrote my papers in silence, triple-checking every sentence for grammar mistakes. I practiced reading aloud to empty classrooms, trying to soften the edges of my accent that seemed to amuse everyone so much. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't escape the label Madison had given me. Broken Lian. The girl who didn't belong in an English program because she couldn't speak English properly. My grades were perfect, but my professors treated me like a curiosity rather than a serious student. My classmates acted like my accent was contagious, something they might catch if they sat too close. At night, I lay in bed listening to American podcasts and news programs, trying to train my tongue to make sounds that felt foreign and strange. My accent had become a cage, trapping me inside other people's expectations of what I could never be. By October, I was ready to quit. The isolation was crushing my spirit, and the constant humiliation made it hard to concentrate on my studies. I drafted an email to the registrar asking about withdrawal procedures. But before I could send it, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice bright with excitement. "Lian, how are your classes? Are you learning so much?" I could hear my father in the background asking if I was eating enough. They were so proud, so hopeful. They had worked extra shifts for months to help me buy textbooks and winter clothes. "The classes are good, Mama," I managed to say. "Your English must be getting so much better. Soon you will sound just like an American professor." That night, I tore up my withdrawal letter. My parents had sacrificed too much for me to give up because some spoiled students thought my accent was funny. Madison Clarke had privilege and connections and perfect pronunciation, but she didn't have my hunger. I made a promise to myself. I would not just survive this program. I would master it. I would become so good at analyzing literature, so brilliant at understanding language, that my accent would become irrelevant. They wanted to break me. Instead, I would become unbreakable. While Madison and her friends coasted through their classes on charm and family connections, I became obsessed with excellence. I read everything twice, analyzed every passage until I understood layers of meaning that other students missed. My professors started noticing. Dr. Anderson pulled me aside after class one day. "Lian, your essay on Hemingway was exceptional. Have you considered graduate school?" Graduate school felt impossible for someone like me, but I nodded and thanked him. I spent winter break in the empty library, reading critical theory and literary criticism that wasn't even assigned. I wanted to understand not just what American authors wrote, but how language itself worked as a tool of power. Madison returned from Christmas vacation in January with a new designer handbag and stories about skiing in Aspen. She had barely changed, still the same confident girl who thought everything came easily. But I had changed. My accent was still there, but my ideas had grown sharper and more sophisticated. When I spoke in class now, professors leaned forward to listen. My words carried weight, even if they sounded different. I stopped caring about fitting in and started caring about standing out. Not for the wrong reasons, but for the right ones. My mind, not my voice, would be my weapon. Spring semester brought the annual undergraduate essay competition. The winner would have their paper published in the university's literary journal and receive a $1,000 prize. I worked on my submission for weeks. It was an analysis of how immigrant voices in American literature challenged traditional narratives about belonging and identity. I wrote from experience, but I grounded every argument in careful research and textual evidence. Madison submitted an essay about feminism in Jane Austen that recycled arguments from SparkNotes. She was confident she would win. I mean, who else could possibly compete? She told her friends within earshot of me. The announcement came during Dr. Anderson's class. He smiled as he opened the envelope. This year's winner demonstrated exceptional critical thinking and original analysis. The first place essay was written by Lian Chen. The classroom went silent. Madison's mouth fell open. Her essay on immigrant perspectives in American literature will be published in next month's journal, Dr. Anderson continued. It's truly groundbreaking work. After class, Madison cornered me by my locker. You probably had help, she said. There's no way someone with your English skills could write at that level alone. But 3 professors had praised my work. My ideas were speaking louder than my accent for the first time. Professor Richard Hale became my mentor that spring. He was the department's most respected scholar, and he saw something in my work that others had missed. Lian, you have a unique perspective on how language shapes identity, he told me during office hours. Have you thought about publishing more of your research? I hesitated. Publishing meant putting my ideas out into the world where they could be judged by scholars I had only read about in textbooks. I'm worried about my accent, I admitted. When I present at conferences, people focus on how I sound instead of what I'm saying. Professor Hale leaned back in his chair. Some of the most brilliant minds in literature came from immigrant backgrounds. Your accent isn't a weakness, Lian. It's evidence of your journey. He helped me submit my essay competition piece to a national undergraduate journal. When it was accepted for publication, I stared at the email for 10 minutes, unable to believe it was real. Congratulations, Professor Hale said when I told him. This is just the beginning. Madison heard about my publication through the department gossip network. She rolled her eyes when someone congratulated me. It's probably just a pity publication, she muttered. They needed diversity in their journal. But I knew the truth. My ideas were good enough to stand on their own merit. My first published paper came out in the fall of my senior year. Immigrant Voices and the Reconstruction of American Literary Identity appeared in the Journal of Undergraduate Literary Criticism. I held the physical journal in my hands, staring at my name in print. Lian Chen. No mention of my accent or my broken English. Just my ideas, preserved forever in academic literature. The paper got attention. Professors from other universities emailed me with questions and compliments. A graduate school recruiter called to discuss PhD programs. Madison's reaction was predictable. Anyone can publish in undergraduate journals, she told her friends. It's not like it's a real academic publication. But Dr. Anderson assigned my paper as required reading in his next semester's class. Students who had once mocked my pronunciation were now studying my analysis of immigrant literature. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. When I spoke in seminars now, classmates took notes. When I made arguments about textual interpretation, professors nodded thoughtfully. My accent hadn't changed, but everything else had. I had proven that brilliance doesn't require perfect pronunciation. Ideas transcend the voice that speaks them. For the first time since arriving at the university, I felt like I belonged. Not because I fit in, but because I had carved out my own space in the academic world through sheer intellectual force. Graduation day arrived with typical Colorado sunshine. Madison walked across the stage with her perfect smile, accepting her diploma with honors she had earned through grade inflation and family donations rather than actual achievement. She had already secured a position at a prestigious New York publishing house through her father's connections. No interviews, no competition. Just a phone call from Daddy to an old fraternity brother. "I can't wait to start my career," she told everyone at the reception. "Publishing is so much more practical than graduate school." When my name was called, I walked across the stage as valedictorian of the English Literature program. 4 years of straight A's, multiple publications, and recommendations from every professor I had worked with. But there were no family connections waiting for me. No guaranteed job offers or safety nets. Just graduate school applications and the hope that my academic record would speak louder than other people's prejudices. Madison hugged me at the reception, a gesture that felt more like a performance than genuine affection. "Good luck with whatever you end up doing," she said with a condescending smile. "I'm sure you'll find something that works for you." She had no idea that I was about to disappear into graduate school for the next decade, building something she could never imagine. Graduate school at Harvard was different from undergraduate life, but the challenges were familiar. International students and scholars from diverse backgrounds faced subtle discrimination disguised as academic critique. At conferences, I watched brilliant researchers get dismissed because of their accents or their non-Western approaches to literary analysis. The same dynamics that had plagued my undergraduate years played out on a national stage. But I had learned to navigate these waters. I published regularly, presented at major conferences, and built relationships with scholars who valued intellectual rigor over superficial judgments. Madison, meanwhile, was discovering that the real world was less impressed by her charm than university professors had been. She bounced between publishing jobs, always landing new positions through family connections but never quite succeeding in any of them. I heard updates through mutual acquaintances. She had been let go from 3 different companies for poor performance. Her privileged background had given her access but not competence. While she struggled in the professional world, I was thriving in academia. My dissertation on post-colonial literature won multiple awards. Publishers were interested in turning it into a book. The girl they had called Broken Lian was becoming Dr. Lian Chen, respected scholar and rising star in literary criticism. My first teaching position was at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. Some students initially struggled with my accent, but most quickly realized that I knew more about literature than any professor they had encountered. I was patient with students who seemed confused by my pronunciation, but I never apologized for it. My accent was part of who I was, and my ideas were too valuable to be diminished by superficial concerns. Professor Chen explains things so clearly, one student wrote in my evaluations. She makes complex theories accessible and exciting. Another wrote, at first I had trouble understanding her accent, but now I think she's the most brilliant professor in the department. I wish I could take every class she teaches. Slowly, respect began to outweigh ridicule. Students recommended my classes to their friends. Colleagues sought my input on curriculum decisions. My research was getting cited by other scholars. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. The same voice that had once been mocked was now commanding authority in academic settings across the country. Madison was still bouncing between jobs in New York, her resume growing longer but not more impressive. Each position lasted 18 months at most before she was quietly asked to leave. But I was building something permanent. Something that couldn't be taken away by other people's prejudices. 10 years passed quickly in the academic world. I moved from assistant professor to associate professor to department chair. My research on immigrant literature had helped reshape how American literary studies approached questions of identity and belonging. Madison's career trajectory was the opposite of mine. She had burned bridges in New York publishing and moved back to Colorado, where family money continued to cushion her failures. I heard she had tried several different careers: marketing, public relations, even real estate. Nothing stuck because she had never learned how to succeed through actual effort rather than inherited advantage. Meanwhile, my reputation was growing beyond my wildest undergraduate dreams. Harvard offered me a visiting professorship. Oxford invited me for a semester-long fellowship. My books were being translated into multiple languages. The girl who had been mocked for her broken English was now recognized as one of the leading voices in contemporary literary criticism. Universities across the country were trying to recruit me. When the position opened at my undergraduate alma mater, I knew it was time to complete the circle. Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, with oversight of the English department. The same department where Madison Clarke had once made my life a living hell was about to become mine to run. The appointment was announced on a Tuesday morning in March. Dr. Lian Chen, new Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. The irony was unmistakable and perfect. 20 years ago, they had mocked my English and suggested I didn't belong in an English program. Now I was about to become the gatekeeper of English education at the university level. I would control curriculum decisions, hiring processes, tenure reviews, and budget allocations. Every professor in the English department would report to me, directly or indirectly. Students and faculty who had once dismissed my voice because of its accent would now depend on that same voice for their academic futures. The pronunciation they had mocked would decide their careers. My office was on the top floor of the Humanities building, with windows overlooking the quad where I had once been humiliated. The view was symbolic. I could see everything now from a position of power and authority. My first faculty meeting was scheduled for the following week. I spent the weekend preparing my remarks, thinking about how to balance professional courtesy with personal satisfaction. 20 years of preparation had led to this moment. The student they called Broken Lian was about to take control of the very system that had tried to break her. The revenge would be poetic justice at its finest. As dean, I controlled everything that mattered in academic life. Research funding that could make or break a professor's career. Tenure decisions that determined job security for life. Hiring recommendations that opened or closed doors to promising scholars. Students who needed graduate school recommendations came to my office with nervous smiles. Faculty members who wanted sabbatical approval scheduled meetings with careful preparation. The same people who had once treated my accent as entertainment now spoke to me with careful respect. They needed my approval, my signature, my professional endorsement. I was fair but exacting in my standards. Excellence mattered more than connections. Research quality trumped family background. The meritocracy that should have existed all along was finally being implemented. My accent hadn't changed, but the power dynamics had completely reversed. When I spoke in faculty meetings, everyone listened carefully. When I made decisions about departmental policy, those decisions became law. The girl who had hidden in library corners was now holding court in boardrooms. The voice that had been mocked was now the final authority on academic careers. I savored the irony every day. They had tried to make me feel broken, but I had emerged stronger. Now their futures depended on the very voice they had once dismissed. 3 months into my tenure as dean, I received an unexpected application for an adjunct teaching position in the English department. The name at the top made my heart skip a beat. Madison Clarke. Her resume told a story of career instability and faded prospects. Multiple short-term positions at various companies, all ending with diplomatic language about mutual decisions to part ways. A master's degree completed part-time over 6 years. No publications, no research experience, no academic credentials beyond the minimum requirements. She was applying to teach basic composition courses to freshmen. The same woman who had once mocked my English was now desperate enough to take entry-level teaching work in the department I controlled. The application included a cover letter filled with vague language about her passion for education and her desire to give back to students. No mention of her previous career failures or her lack of teaching experience. Most importantly, there was no indication that she knew who the current dean was. She had submitted her application through the standard HR portal without researching the department leadership. I scheduled her interview for the following Friday. She would walk into my office expecting to meet a stranger, only to discover that her victim had become her judge. Madison entered my office wearing a conservative navy suit and a nervous smile. She had aged well, but 20 years of career frustrations had left subtle lines around her eyes that betrayed her struggles. She was halfway through her standard interview handshake when recognition dawned. Her smile froze, then slowly faded as she stared at my face with growing horror. "Lian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Chen," I corrected gently, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat. Thank you for your interest in our adjunct position." She sat down mechanically, still processing the impossible situation she had walked into. The girl she had tormented was now sitting behind an imposing desk with authority over her potential employment. I had no idea you were the dean," she stammered. "Obviously," I replied calmly. "Shall we begin the interview? I've reviewed your application, and I have some questions about your qualifications." For the next 30 minutes, I conducted the most professional interview of my career. I asked about her teaching philosophy, her approach to composition instruction, and her plans for engaging with struggling students. Madison answered as best she could, but her responses were generic and unprepared. She had clearly expected this to be a formality rather than a serious evaluation. Throughout the interview, I maintained perfect professional courtesy. My questions were fair, my tone was neutral, and my demeanor was appropriately academic. No observer would have detected any personal history between us. Madison, meanwhile, grew increasingly flustered as she realized she was bombing the interview. Her answers became more desperate, her examples more vague, her attempts at charm more obvious. "I've always been passionate about helping students find their voices," she said during one particularly weak response. "Interesting," I replied. "Can you give me specific examples of how you've helped students overcome language barriers or confidence issues in their writing?" She had no examples because she had no relevant experience. Her entire application was built on the assumption that her degree and her family connections would be sufficient. But I was no longer impressed by pedigree without substance. 20 years of academic achievement had taught me the difference between credentials and competence. "I think I would bring a fresh perspective to the role," Madison said, trying another angle. "What kind of perspective?" I asked. She couldn't answer specifically because she hadn't thought beyond getting hired. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, each question revealing more gaps in her preparation and qualifications. By the end, we both knew how it would go. After Madison left, I spent the evening researching her academic background more thoroughly. What I discovered was even worse than I had expected. Her master's thesis, submitted to a different university 6 years earlier, contained extensive plagiarism. Entire paragraphs had been copied from published sources without attribution. The work had apparently been accepted because of inadequate oversight and family pressure on faculty members. I also found records of academic probation during her undergraduate years, problems that had been quietly resolved through generous family donations to various university programs. The pattern was clear and consistent. Madison had spent her entire life using privilege and connections to avoid accountability for substandard work. She had never learned to succeed on merit because she had never been required to try. Her recent job history showed the same pattern. Initial hiring based on family connections, followed by poor performance, followed by quiet departures that avoided damaging her reputation in professional circles. But she had finally reached the limits of what privilege could accomplish. No family connections could force me to hire an unqualified candidate, and no amount of charm could compensate for 20 years of mediocrity. I had all the evidence I needed to reject her application. But I wanted something more satisfying than a simple denial letter. I called Madison the next morning with an unexpected offer. "After reviewing your application, I'd like to invite you back for a second interview," I told her. "This time, I'd like you to give a sample lecture to our faculty and some students. It's standard procedure for teaching positions." She was thrilled, interpreting the invitation as a positive sign. "What topic should I prepare?" she asked eagerly. "Choose any aspect of composition instruction that you feel passionate about," I replied. "The presentation should be 20 minutes, followed by questions from the audience." What I didn't tell her was that the audience would include several professors who had been at the university during our undergraduate years. They would remember her, just as they would remember me. I also scheduled the presentation for the main conference room in the Humanities building, with seating for 50 people. Faculty members from across the department would attend, along with graduate students and a few carefully selected undergraduates. Madison would have a large audience for what I expected to be a complete disaster. She would expose her own incompetence in the most public way possible, just as she had once tried to expose mine. The difference was that her exposure would be based on actual inadequacy rather than prejudice about accents. Madison spent the week before her presentation telling everyone who would listen about her upcoming opportunity. She was convinced that her performance had impressed me and that the job was practically guaranteed. "I think the dean really likes me," she told mutual acquaintances. "We have a good rapport." She apparently believed that our shared history would work in her favor rather than against her. Perhaps she thought I would be grateful for the chance to reconnect with an old classmate. Her confidence was both amusing and tragic. She had learned nothing from 20 years of career failures. She still believed that charm and connections could substitute for competence and preparation. I, meanwhile, spent the week preparing questions that would expose the gaps in her knowledge and experience. Not cruel questions, but probing ones that any qualified teaching candidate should be able to answer. The day of her presentation, she arrived early and set up her materials with obvious pride. She had prepared a PowerPoint slideshow and brought handouts for the audience. As faculty members filed into the conference room, I introduced her with standard professional courtesy. "Madison Clarke is here to present on composition pedagogy as part of our hiring process. Please give her your full attention." She smiled brilliantly and began her presentation with complete confidence. Madison's presentation was exactly as disastrous as I had hoped. Her understanding of composition theory was superficial at best. Her teaching methods were outdated by 15 years. Her examples were generic and clearly borrowed from textbooks rather than personal experience. But the real damage came during the question period. Dr. Anderson, who had been present during our undergraduate classes, asked about her approach to working with students whose first language wasn't English. "How would you support a student who was struggling with pronunciation or accent-related confidence issues?" he asked. Madison's answer revealed everything about her character that had remained unchanged since college. "I think it's important for students to adapt to American academic standards," she said. "Clear communication is essential, and students need to work on their English skills if they want to succeed." The room grew uncomfortable. Several faculty members exchanged glances. I leaned forward in my seat. "Can you elaborate on what you mean by clear communication? Are you suggesting that accents interfere with intellectual content?" Madison doubled down on her prejudice without realizing what she was revealing. "Well, yes, to some extent. If students can't express themselves clearly, how can we evaluate their ideas fairly?" The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone knew my story. Everyone understood the implications of what she had just said. The hiring committee met the following Monday morning. The discussion was brief and unanimous. Ms. Clarke's presentation raised serious concerns about her pedagogical approach, Dr. Anderson said diplomatically. Her views on linguistic diversity seem inconsistent with our department's values. Another committee member was more direct. She essentially argued that students with accents can't be fairly evaluated. That's not just wrong, it's discriminatory. I allowed the discussion to proceed without revealing my personal history with Madison. The committee reached the obvious conclusion based purely on her demonstrated inadequacy. We drafted a rejection letter that afternoon. Standard language about competitive applicant pools and better fits elsewhere. No mention of the offensive comments that had sealed her fate. But word spread quickly through academic circles, as it always does. Madison's disastrous presentation became a cautionary tale about preparation and professionalism. Within weeks, her reputation in local educational circles was thoroughly damaged. Other universities that might have considered her for similar positions quietly removed her from their candidate lists. Her career in academia was finished before it could begin. The same woman who had once tried to destroy my academic aspirations had destroyed her own through ignorance and prejudice. The circle was finally complete. I sit alone in my office this evening, looking out at the quad where Madison Clarke once humiliated me in front of my classmates. The sunset casts long shadows across the same pathways where I once hurried to escape the sound of students mimicking my accent. 20 years have passed since those dark undergraduate days. My voice still carries the rhythms of my childhood in China. My pronunciation still marks me as someone who learned English as a second language. But that same voice now decides the futures of hundreds of students and dozens of faculty members. The accent they once mocked now carries the authority to shape academic careers and educational policies. Madison Clarke will not be teaching composition to freshmen. She will not be shaping young minds or representing this university in any capacity. Her application has been rejected, her reputation damaged, her academic aspirations permanently derailed. I didn't destroy her through cruelty or vindictiveness. I simply held her to the same standards I hold everyone else. The difference is that she had spent her entire life avoiding those standards through privilege and connections. When faced with actual merit-based evaluation, she crumbled completely. I still speak with the same accent they called broken. But I didn't just master English literature. I became its gatekeeper. And Madison's future is gone forever. That is the sweetest victory of all.